Hello, dear friends. This stream will be in English, and there is a link to the Russian version. So let's start from the very beginning.
Special military operation is moving to Central Asia with tectonic shifts in favor of Trumpism 2 before the Special Military Operation, SMO, in Ukraine. Trump 45 began to push petrocrats of Russia out of the world order. But he did not have time because of the betrayal of the digitocracy at the behest of the US demos with their hidden ties with the Kremlin. Navalny's so-called death revealed these connections to the whole world. Alas, under Trump 45, there was a dialogue between the Saudi petrocrats, for example, and the digitocracy of Israel, for example. After Trump, under Biden, there has been a bloody fight between the petrocracy and the digitocracy for the lithium of Donbass for 2 years. This fight of the lords, in which the forelocks of the serfs are cracking, is covered up by media mercenaries with fairy tales, as they call narratives about the genocide of the Russian language, then about the Third World War for the integrity of Christian Jewish civilization against the barbarians of the global south, and so on and so forth. The idiocy of sanctions has legalized the shadow market and the Kremlin's ties on the world stage. That is why it is important to understand what gives success or failure of the SMO to the lords-digitocrats and lords-petrocrats. For the latter, sanctions legalized the parallel, or rather shadow, import-export of the Russian Federation with profits in $220 billion for 2023 alone. While the lithium of Donbass has increased in price from 11.3 trillion euro from the fall of 2021 after the decision, summer 2022, of the PRC to produce up to 90% of lithium batteries for global digitalization by the 2050s. A steady lull in the SMO throughout 2023 has led to a reduction in international military support for Ukraine. Back in February 2024, General Zaluzhny, who was soon dismissed by President Zelensky, claimed that ineffective sanctions against the Russian Federation only strengthened the position of the Russian petrocracy with its military-industrial complex and fuel and energy complex, and the growing demonstrative assistance to the Kremlin from the SCOBRICS, with the obvious inaction of 52 Friends of Ukraine countries, guarantees the success of the Russian Federation in the oppositional war of attrition in the Donbass with its lithium. With Zaluzhny as the leader of the digitocracy in Ukraine and Belarus, without Lukashenko, his plans will be supported by the Biden-Sunak Anglo-American alliance after their agreement in the summer of 2023. Zelensky has such plans to modernize the armed forces of Ukraine during the liberation of Donbass from the colonization of the Russian Federation if he can. Received from the UK-US alliance, with Sunak as Prime Minister and Biden in power, such new technological means that will help the armed forces of Ukraine continue the liberation of Donbass and other zones of Ukraine. Conduct operations to reduce the economic potential of Russia. Carry out operations for the greatest isolation while maximizing the exhaustion of the Kremlin throughout Russia through IT/AI tools with their search and strike operations, while monitoring as crisis zones for strikes against them in the south and north of Ukraine. Replace the previous methods of psychological warfare with hacker cyber attacks within the society and the army of the Russian Federation and the CSTO. Zelensky for combining the combat and preventive actions of the armed forces of Ukraine with the use of unmanned and cyber weapons and out of Ukraine while rejecting military junk from countries that are friends of the President of Ukraine. It is possible to shift the attention of the military-industrial complex of the United States and its allies from the zone of opposition to the Kremlin from its SMO in Ukraine to the huge area of Central Asia. This was discussed by experts from the USA and Kazakhstan on February 22nd. I would like to note the ideas of an hour of discussion and the high staff culture of the discussion with the moderator Andrew Cutchins. The pluralism of opinions on the role of the CSTO in shifting the attention of the United States and the Kremlin from the SMO in Ukraine to Central Asia is striking. Firstly, about the perception of such a possible transfer first by the media of Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries. There was an increasing distrust of the PRC as an ally of the Russian Federation in Central Asia, with greater trust in the United States NATO. So, in Kazakhstan, there is more trust in Moscow than in Beijing. At the same time, it is very subtly noted that Arabs, Muslims and Chinese are still consistently pushing the Russian Federation out of Central Asia, in particular, from Baikonur and other areas with rich uranium mines. Aren't these signs of opposition from the petrocracy of Nazarbayev's clans to Tokayev, who is the digitocracy leader with his pro-Chinese orientation? There was an influx of investment in ITAI to the Central Asian countries from China, which is still more than investment from the Netherlands, the United States, etc. The confrontation between petrocracy and digitalocracy in Central Asia exacerbates the growth of fossil fuel production there when it is exported through the Russian Federation. In that discussion, there were assumptions that the strengthening of the Russian Federation and Ukraine would lead either to the decolonization of all rich Kazakhstan and Central Asia as a whole, or to a return to the practice of Nazarbayev's times. There has been debate about whether the Kremlin's small seizure of control over Central Asia's oil is colonization or not. At the same time, it was noted that the seizure of large pieces of such control became habitual for Central Asia back in the era of globalization under the slogans of kindness and friendship. Although today such slogans are heard more and more often from Iran, India and China. In those disputes, there is also a potbelly trifle like Turkey. Erdogan with Great Turan wants to play in Central Asia without big guys. That is why in Dushanbe they talk more often about Afghanistan than about the SMO and even Great Turan. Such a polyphony of views on the role of Central Asia is noted in a survey of focus groups and in Kazakhstan about the ambitions of imperialist actors. Surveys have revealed two powerful trends among elite groups: narcissism and fear. Before the announcement of Navalny's death on February 16th, polls in Central Asian countries were dominated by his populism, inspired, in my opinion, by the influence of the US Democratic Party. Biden's reception of Navalny's wife after her husband's death, which is a pure imitation, in my opinion, confirms the role of Demos in this process of processing the moods of the elites of the Russian Federation, Ukraine, Belarus and CSTO actors. Then the so-called murder of Navalny automatically reduces the level of populism and radicalism outside the Russian Federation, more precisely in the Central Asian countries, as a testing ground for battles between petrocracy and digitalocracy in many countries. This is also a blow to the reputation of the US Democratic Party with its allies. Bipartisants from the Republican camp, with their obvious failure to save Private Zelensky from General Zaluzhny, with the failure of the SMO in the Donbass, Kazakhstan and the entire Central Asia fear the loss of sovereignty if the Russian Federation invades there from Ukraine. And Biden's strategy with his fatal phantom, Ukrainian Lend-Lease, will confirm all those fears in Central Asia as well. The former fears of the Kremlin's occupation of the entire Baltic states from the Ukraine it seized, according to Andrei Pyankovsky's theory, are now being transferred to Central Asia for Biden. This is done for the election campaign of the US Democratic Party, to show American military might, as they did in the USSR with fakes about Soviet military threat. Participants in that discussion on February 22nd believed that in the Russian Federation, those fakes according to Pyankovsky's patterns were being spread by media Divatina Kanzalaki. But the reserves of propaganda strength of the Russian Federation are less and less. Or not? After all, the Kremlin manages to earn more and more under sanctions. Before the introduction of Biden's theoretical 500 sanctions, at least, for example, in the Global South, in relations with the PRC, The influence of the nuclear power of the Russian Federation is decreasing with the emergence of an alternative to nuclear energy on the part of the new Green Project for modernization on lithium and aluminum. Kazakhstan's uranium is losing its former importance for the PRC as well. The Kazakhs, with their huge reserves, are left with their noses. Yes, and the Russian Federation is becoming less and less a nuclear power with increased monitoring by myriads of satellites in orbit with their digital control. Therefore, the lithium of Donbass with equipped coal mines when delivering white gold is not exported through the south, but through the corridor between Poland and Lithuania to Kaliningrad. On that trail, an umbrella of the tactical nuclear weaponry in Belarus has already been opened. Here is an anchor for the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And without it, the Kremlin will find itself in Central Asia under the command of the SCOBRICS bloc. The Kremlin has a choice: to rely on the commercialization of lithium mining and exports without Beijing and its interests in Central Asia, or reduce dependence on Kazakhstan's nuclear ore and lease for Baikonur. With such a perspective, the Russian Federation has a more reliable ally in Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan. There is a good Russian language as the state language in the society and the armed forces, and domestic sympathy for your neighbors who suffer from Chinese chauvinism. The Kyrgyz and yours share a genetic memory of their former greatness. Alas, in Astana, the former general greatness of the Nazarbayev era is melting away with the rise in consumer prices for the population and different Jews, representatives of the Genghis Khan family under President Tokayev. This is a broad base for bribing the population of both the United States and China within the framework of the quickly drawn-up laws of the SCOBRICS. They negate all the previous provisions and norms of both the UN and the post-Soviet treaties. Even before Navalny's so-called death, relocators from the Russian Federation and the Central Asian countries felt the negative effects of the elimination of those, even post-Soviet norms, with growing local chauvinism. Well, what kind of Marshall Plan is up to the relocators implementing when shifting the Kremlin's geostrategic focus from the SMO to Central Asia is over? None. But it is possible for the urban elite of Central Asia to be influenced by soft power, non-military, when it is colonized through the bonds of digitocracy. However, the question arises about relocators in Central Asia. After the clearly demonstrative so-called death of Navalny, will they want to return to the Russian Federation? The Navalny phenomenon is now an indicator, one for relocators with their decision to return to the prison of Putinism with a very obvious end, to unite the Central Asian elites with relocators in the local confrontation between digitocracy and petrocracy. 3. Index of cooperation action of drones and other military crap for the SMO in Ukraine and for Hamas in Palestine without Israel on behalf of the SCOBRICS bloc. In Kyrgyzstan, there is also a trend to discredit the SMO in Ukraine while criticizing Biden there, which leads to the conclusion about the power of the PRC. In Central Asian countries, Biden is criticized for the panicked withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan while ignoring the fate of non-Pashtun allies of the United States. At the same time, President Xi has high authority with his determination not to cede northern Kazakhstan to the Kremlin with or after Putin. And Beijing itself declares a lack of interest in the same territories, as Putin does with regard to the lands of Ukraine. In Central Asia, Beijing is betting on preventing terrorism from those territories under the pretext of helping the Uyghurs and neutralizing the genetic memory of cooperation as descendants of Genghis Khan. The shock of Beijing's actions against the Uyghurs and Tibetans in Central Asia is attributed to the CIA. It muddies the waters, as in Ukraine under the Dems with the actual violation of human rights and women's rights. Therefore, it is important for the United States to reformat ties with the leaders of Central Asia under the slogan of protecting small nations from large ones with their ambitions. So, there is an option for the Kremlin to transfer the colonization of Ukraine with its lithium to the Baltic countries in Andrei Pyankovsky style. Under Trump 47, the Kremlin will definitely transfer the SMO to the Central Asian countries in order to put pressure on the U.S. ally under Biden, Israel, from there. But already at the CPAC conference in the U.S. Capitol on February 24th, at Trump's speech, 7% approved military aid from the United States to Ukraine, and 86% voted for it to Israel. So, here are my takeaways from Zoom on February 22nd and the events after. 1. The transfer of U.S. efforts to the Central Asian countries from Ukraine reduces NATO's military potential against Putin, with the Kremlin's willing unwitting collusion with Biden-Harris in denying Ukraine NATO membership in July. 2. Zelensky opens a window of cyber war opportunity for the Russian Federation. The Kremlin has been betting on cyber warfare only since August 2022 by Putin's decree. Cyber troops were created in a couple of months by September 2022. And before that, there were only fakes about Russian hackers and exclusively from DMOS and U.S. intelligence against President Trump 45. Specifically, from Adam Schiff. 3. With the use of old weapons in 2 years, the Russian Federation has started to digitalize the armed forces and society through esports at the SCOBRICS Games in Kazan. They have been running smoothly since February 21st to March 3rd, 2024, as a new high-tech international tournament called Games of the Future. Already social networks in the Russian Federation are glitching because of those games of patriots and internationalists for the decolonization of the global south. 4. The transfer of the Kremlin's militarized cyber and other efforts from Ukraine to Central Asia after the SMO training will move to the global south. There is no need for obsolete weapons of the 20th century there. The rapid development of the military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation, together with the military-industrial complex of Iran and other SCOBRICS countries, breeds nano-weapons against the old junk of weapons such as AWACS, for example, in the EU, NATO and the Sunak-Biden alliance for the development of the AI sphere. 5. Cyber troops are trained in 3-5 months, instead of 3 to 5 years for the officer corps according to the standards of the 20th century. Civilians themselves master the principles of self-defense against hackers on free-of-charge platforms of OpenAI in 1-2 weeks. 6. The transfer of military activity in form of the SMO to the Central Asian region until March 17-18 will allow the United States and France, with Macron's announced military assistance to Armenia, instead of the CSTO, to pull the armed forces of the Russian Federation away from Ukraine, where the international brigades from neighboring and distant countries have been formed against the Kremlin. See the failure of Biden's bulk with illusory billions for military aid to Zelensky has already led to Zelensky's rebellion, even with the Hero of Ukraine award from the hands of the president himself. In the Central Asian countries, the United States, through opposition to Putinism, will have a cheaper non-nuclear deterrent without the costly dances with nuclear sabers of the Kennedy era. 7. The EU is already shifting digital control over the machinations of Navalny's death to the Russian opposition. This saves the EU NATO expenses for the protection of the borders of Moldova and the Baltic states from infiltration by the Kremlin's mercenaries from the SCOBRICS countries. First of all, as refugees and political fighters like Ilya Ponomarev in the ranks of subordinates to the armed forces of Ukraine. 8. Voting on the CPAC forum for the refusal of military assistance to Ukraine, 7%, and for assistance to Israel, 86%, also is in favor of transferring geostrategic efforts from the SMO to Central Asia. 9. Playing on the waves of anti-Semitism in the EU and North America after Gaza on October 7th is sweeping away the demos with their previous bet on rich Jewish Pinocchios. They are leaving California and other wealthy states under the Dems because of the riots and violence of the urban mob there. 10. Therefore, Trumpism too is a fusion of the rednecks of small and medium-sized cities and the blue and white collar of big cities in the primaries in favor of Donald Trump 47. Vladimir Lukov.
Well, now it's all over, and I would like to know your questions, your requests, and your solutions of the problem that I have arisen right now. Thank you for listening, and let's be in touch. Bye-bye.